Then the dragon was enraged at the woman and went off to make war against the rest of her offspring, those who obey God's commandments and hold to the testimony of Jesus. And the dragon stood on the shore of the sea, and I saw a beast coming up out of the sea. He had 10 horns and 7 heads, with 10 crowns on his horns, and on each head a blasphemous name. Let me start this study with a reminder. We put the verses and chapters in the Bible, so we often don't realize that when we start a new chapter, it's a continuation of what is recorded in the previous chapter. Such is the case with the dragon and the beast. In our preceding passages, we find the dragon enraged at the woman clothed with the sun, going off to make war against the rest of her offspring, those who obey God's commandments and hold to the testimony of Jesus. Who are these offspring, if not the apostles and disciples of Christ who went forth after the day of Pentecost to spread the gospel to the known world at that time? Were they not persecuted by the same Jewish religious system and their leaders that had brought Jesus to the cross? Didn't Jesus himself tell them before his crucifixion that they too would be persecuted and hated just as he was? And so we're told that it's the dragon who stands on the shore of the sea, not John, as the King James and other translations show, representing the Jewish religious leaders and the opposition they brought against the Lord's disciples after his death and resurrection. It's the dragon who watches the beast come up out of the sea. So, am I suggesting that the beast of Revelation 13:1 is connected to the people of God? Yes. But how can that be if the beast denotes the carnal nature and its head's the carnal mind? Well, the answer is in 1 Corinthians 15, where we are told that the resurrection of the dead is sown in corruption and raised in incorruption. Friend, when we're first drawn by the Father to Christ, we bring our pride with us. It doesn't just disappear. Why? Because pride is a mindset that takes time to change. Hence the reason Paul says we must be transformed by the renewing of the mind. It took years to form this carnal mindset, so it takes time to unform it, if you will. For this reason, we must pass through the fire of the flaming sword before we reach and become a tree of life and the image of the man of heaven. The likeness of God comes from the middle of the fire. Think Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego. Resurrection, dear friend, is not an event, but a process unfolding little by little until we are truly transformed. We shall know the truth, Jesus said, not the truth of our denomination, nor the truth of our own religious opinions, but the truth that makes us free. It's not hard to see that today so few understand this, let alone possess it. Another thing to note about Revelation 13:1 and the NIV rendering is that it states 10 horns and 7 heads, not 7 heads and 10 horns. Is this significant? Well, I cannot say for sure, but either way, I see 10 as representing the Old Covenant and law. Not only do the 10 Commandments suggest the law of God, but our 10 fingers and toes suggest a judgment of said law on our works and walk or conduct. And remember, 17 is victory, so it's not a judgment to condemnation, but a judgment of sanctification to life, to bearing fruit for others. That, dear friend, is the message of the cross. Horns are an extension of the skull or head, the bone being inward, not outward. So, might the 10 horns also represent all of us who are a collective part of the beast for a time, who do in fact worship the dragon and the beast, or adore the attributes of the carnal nature and mind until such time that we are awakened to his deceptive ways and working? So let's back up a second to the dragon. Revelation 12:3 tells us there are crowns on the 7 heads, but with the beast, the crowns are on the 10 horns. Why the difference? Well, here's my thinking. 7 denotes fullness. So we're told in Galatians 4:4 that when the fullness of the time had come, God sent forth His Son, born of a woman, born under the law, to redeem those who were under the law. Under the law? Yes. Under the collective power and authority, as it were, of the great red dragon. And so this fullness is depicted by the 7 crowns on the 7 heads, which were firmly in place at the time Christ began His ministry. Now, the 10 horns with their crowns. This shows up when the beast rises out of the sea, and I stand with my previous thought. This denotes the need for divine order to be reestablished through the judgment of the law as pictured by the 10 Commandments. Such judgment cannot be fully reckoned or perceived until Christ died and rose from the dead, bringing to the forefront the understanding of the self-sacrifice needed to judge properly. Even up to this present moment, most still judge through the filter of the self, not realizing that we are condemning in others what is only true of ourselves. This is a hard pill to swallow, but nonetheless true. For when Jesus was called good teacher, He replied, "Why do you call me good? No one is good but one, that is, God." And we mustn't forget 1 Peter 4:17. Let's read it and the surrounding context from the Concordant Literal New Testament. "For let not any of you be suffering as a murderer, or a thief, or an evildoer, or as an interferer in others' affairs. Yet, if as a Christian, let him not be ashamed, yet let him be glorifying God in this name, seeing that it is the era for the judgment to begin from the house of God. Now, if first from us, what is the consummation of those who are stubborn as to God's evangel? And if the just one is hardly being saved, where will the irreverent and the sinner appear? So that, let those also who are suffering according to the will of God commit their souls to a faithful Creator in the doing of good." Note what Peter says. It is the era for the judgment to begin from the house of God. Some take this to mean that as believers we've already been judged. So, from means we're not being judged now, but everyone else will be. Well, in one sense, this is true, for the entire world has been judged through Christ and His sacrifice, once and for all. However, the Lord's death on the cross doesn't negate the process of judgment for us or others. Instead, it exemplifies God's purpose in it and how it proceeds from the purest essence of self-sacrifice through the Father as seen through His Son's death on the cross. I know I'm wearing this word out, but we're talking about a process, not an event, integrated into the divine and universal principle of sowing and reaping, which is in fact the process of resurrection. As believers, we are judged first, followed by those who are stubborn as to God's evangel. That's why I've said in other studies that the great white throne judgment is not something yet to happen, but a present reality, for it is this era which Peter speaks about, and that almost 2,000 years ago. So, this era began in the 1st century and continues up to this present time. And to be clear, this is the great white throne judgment. Think about it. Would God not judge the light of the world before He judges the world? Would it be fair not to? For this light cannot be truly righteous in its essence until the pride of the self is eradicated from the mind and heart. Dear brother and sister, judgment is not some huge event involving everyone at the same time, where one by one billions of souls are dragged into some divine courtroom to be condemned by a jury of its peers in the same fashion as it is in this world of form, minus the billions. Rather, it's an ongoing work of the Spirit that has unfolded since the beginning of time. Otherwise, how do we account for all the judgment that has long since transpired from the very beginning? Isn't it true that once a sentence is pronounced and rendered, is judgment not over? Isn't all judgment supposed to be remedial? I'll say it once more. Like resurrection, judgment is a process. In fact, judgment is incorporated within the process of resurrection, symbolized by the second stage of the death of the seed, preceding the third and final stage of life or fruit. To pass through the work of resurrection is to pass through judgment. So, my point in all this? To show why the great red dragon reflects the religious system of the Jews in Jesus' day, while the beast, the religious system of the Gentiles or nations that followed after. But now, let me be more specific. It wasn't the system that was the problem, but the spirit behind it. Think about it. The religious system of the Jews resulted from God's dealings with Moses and Israel long before Jesus ever came. So, that said, the opposition Jesus faced was not due to the system, but to the pride and traditions which had succeeded in making its way into the system and corrupting the very word they embraced. God doesn't judge the system, but the source of its power and authority. And what is that source? Pride. Is it not possible that the same thing has happened within the ranks of Christianity? I will close with the following. When the Lord has washed away the filth of the daughters of Zion and purged the blood of Jerusalem from her midst, by the spirit of judgment and by the spirit of burning. Well, there is certainly more to come, so be sure to join me next time. Please feel free to like, comment, or subscribe, and I sincerely thank you for being a part of Grain of Wheat Publishing.